Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the fifth episode of the Synergy Show. Today, we have a wonderful guest with us, Mr. Austin Yeh. To give you a brief introduction, Austin is an investor, mortgage broker, and the founder of the Rise Network, which is a huge investment network in Toronto and across the GTA. Austin is a very special guest. He's only been doing this for about 5 years, but in 5 years, he's achieved what a lot of people hope to achieve in their entire lives, I would say. Over a $10 million real estate portfolio, over 7,500 people part of his Rise Network, and so much more that we're going to dive into today. Thank you so much for joining us, Austin.
Appreciate you having me on. And honestly, that was a fantastic intro. Sometimes you feel like you don't accomplish, as an entrepreneur, it's like, go, 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 go. And it's like, I didn't sit back and actually think of what happened over the past 5 years.
Exactly. And, 5 years is a long time, but it's also not really a long time, in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, exactly.
And, tell me about, so 5 years ago, you were, I don't want to say nobody, you were Austin Yeh, but you weren't the Austin that you were today. Investor, entrepreneur, mortgage broker, all of these things that we'll get into. Mm-hmm. How did you get into investing in entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So honestly, I didn't honestly think of myself as an entrepreneur when I first got started. I'll walk back a little bit of my backstory, and that'll give you a bit of insight in how I got involved in the real estate space. So growing up, my parents were always very strict on education. And so I was like, I will be a doctor so I can make a lot of money and make my parents happy as well. So just throughout school, elementary school, high school, I was taking all of these science courses. Didn't necessarily feel excited about sciences, and I was doing well in business. So I was like, all right, maybe I'll just shift towards business. But didn't give too much thought into that, right? Just whatever I was good at, that's what I was going to pursue. So in undergrad, I worked all of these different internships from audit, consulting, strategy. And I was going down this path where everyone's like, oh, you are achieving wonderful things. You're supposed to get good grades and get a good job, which is what I was doing. But I didn't feel very excited about life. I just thought to myself, is this all that it has to offer? And so when I began my full-time job, I was working a couple months, and I thought, you know what, I need to do something on the side because I don't think I want to do the full-time corporate grind forever, right? To each their own, but for me, it just didn't resonate with me. And so that's when I was introduced into real estate investing. I started off with stocks and lost a bit of money there.
Like a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people, and keep in mind, I come from a finance background too. I was doing everything I shouldn't have done that I learned in school. I should be doing a long-term hold, right? But I wasn't doing that.
So before we get into your real estate investing career, I just want to stop you here for a second because you mentioned that you noticed or you realized that the corporate grind wasn't for you.
Right.
Was there a particular moment while working for a big corporation where you realized this wasn't for you? Was there an event that happened?
There definitely was. Throughout my corporate experience, largely my experience with my team was fantastic. It was very positive. I just feel like, to get promoted, you do have to play the politics game. It's not always about performance. So 3 years in a row while I was working at my job, I was ranked 4 out of 4, in terms of how they ranked performance. But I never got promoted, and my raise was only 1.3% in a year, which is, when you consider inflation, that's actually, I'm losing money, right? And so at that one point, after a couple years, I was like, you know what, this is probably not it for me. And literally a week and a half after that, I handed in my notice. I was like, I figure out what to do, right? I don't want to be involved in this. But during this time, while I was working at my corporate job, I would say 7 months in, that's when I bought my first property. So while I was working full time, I was still growing my real estate portfolio. And it got to the point where it was still uncomfortable, but that one moment I was like, all right, I'm going to quit now because clearly I'm not getting paid the value that I feel like I'm contributing, right?
And that's the thing, it's not entirely based on meritocracy. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of, nepotism and all these other things that come into play when you're working for a big corporate company.
Yeah.
Let's go back a little bit. So you mentioned you were working for about 7 months. 7 months had passed from when you bought your first property to when you handed in your notice.
No, sorry. 7 months when I began my job is when I purchased my first property.
Oh, within
Yeah,
7
within
months.
7
Within
months.
7
Quickly,
months.
I realized
Wow,
it's
really
not for
quickly.
me. Yeah.
And just before that, you were in university, or
Yeah, I was in university.
Okay,
correct.
so you had
Yeah.
just graduated. When was this? 2019.
This was when did I graduate? 2017. I had about a year off, and then 2019-ish. Yeah. that's when
Okay.
I began.
Okay. So 2019, you graduated. You started working for RBC, I believe, for 7 months, and you quickly realized this wasn't the life that you wanted.
Yeah.
Walk me to when you bought your first investment property. Was that 7 months in, or was that prior to that?
No, so that was about 7, 8 months in. I didn't really consider real estate until I was working at the bank. So, as I mentioned, I was doing a little bit of stocks, but I was in it for the wrong reason, right? It's like, how do I make income from this? Where stocks is a long-term buy and hold. It's like, maybe I need to take a step back and do something less liquid. So, if the market goes up or down, I'm forced to hold on to the asset, right? So I don't have to cave into my emotions. And so I was doing some Googling, some YouTubing, and I found that real estate would be a fantastic asset. It started off with the book that you have here, actually, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Yeah, and this really got my mindset sort of turning. I didn't, this book is great for mindset, not great for technicals of real estate.
I agree.
Right? But it started that first step of gauging my interest in this space, watched YouTube videos, and I decided that, maybe this is a space that's right for me. I couldn't afford anything in Toronto, so I had about $40,000 saved. Obviously, that's not much to get into an investment property in Toronto. And so I found the city of Windsor, and that's when I took my first step into buying my first property. It was in Windsor, actually. Single family home, $130,000, detached. Didn't know much about the market, to be honest. It was just one of the few markets I could afford. And I jumped right on in, right? A lot of learning lessons, though, throughout that experience. A lot of mistakes made.
Did you say $130,000 for a single family?
Yeah, not anymore, but back then, yes, $130,000.
I'll take 5, right?
Right, exactly.
So let's go through that first acquisition. This was your first, wetting your feet in terms of the world of real estate investing. Did you have somebody in your corner guiding you in terms of making this investment?
No.
Or was this something you just kind of did yourself?
I wish I did, not necessarily. It was just like online education. I did jump the gun very, very quickly. I will say that. So maybe I can speak to some of the learning lessons with that first property. The first thing I did is I contacted a listing realtor for a property that I saw. I didn't know what a buying and listing realtor was. I thought they were the same thing, right? And so I contacted them. I said, hey, I'm interested in this. They told me that property sold, but they said, why don't you come down to Windsor? I'll show you the 4 or 5 properties. Not knowing any better, I was like, okay, I'll go down. And I visited them. We went to tour different properties, and they simply shot it back my way. Which one do you want to put an offer on? I guess this is how it works. I need to put an offer in. And so I put an offer on the cheapest property they showed me because I couldn't really afford any other property that they showed me. So that's how the first investment went. And then it was working backwards. It's I got this under contract. What do I need to do, right? I need to find the right contractors. I need to find boots on the ground people. I need to find investors. I don't recommend people to do it the way I did it, but unfortunately it was the path I went down. But learning lessons are a great teacher as well. And so at that point, once I had it under contract, then I went to a bunch of networking events in Windsor. I was just on Facebook trying to find Windsor groups, met with a ton of local investors, and then started building my power team from there. But that was the first investment property.
So let me ask you, did you make money or lose money on the first investment?
I made money. It was very hard to lose money back then, right? Everyone, as long as you held the property long enough, you would make money. But it was a BRRRR, ended up being a BRRRR. So for those, I'm not sure, has anyone talked about BRRRR already?
I don't believe so. So you would be the first. So
okay.
Let's enlighten our guests with what a BRRRR is.
Very simplified, but essentially it's an acronym that stands for buying a property, renovating that property. So that usually the property needs some sort of work. So you do renovations. Ideally, the cost of renovations are going to be less than the value you add to the property. Then you rent the property out. Obviously, it's going to generate cash flow. You want to make sure it's cash flow positive, and you want to refinance the property, right? So after you renovate it, it's worth a certain amount. You refinance it, pull that equity out, and then you repeat the process again. So that property, I ended up putting a lot of sweat equity into it, right? Because I was tight on funds. So I went down there, started doing demo myself, got a contractor to eventually help. Things went way over budget. And I had to pull from lines. I had to borrow money from my parents, from my girlfriend at the time as well. I had to borrow money from to get it to the finish line. And then it reappraised much higher than what I bought it for. So I bought it for $130. I put in about $25,000, including sweat equity, right? And then refinanced close to $180. So it pulled the majority of my money, not all of my money out. Then I got a tenant in there who paid 1 year rent up front. It was less than market, slightly less than market, but I got that rent paycheck for 1 year, and I used all of that money to buy another property after that. Yeah. I was addicted.
And would you say that, you know, what were some of the biggest lessons you learned from doing it the way that you did? Because it was obviously wasn't the conventional route. The conventional route is, you know, you probably make your network first. You know, you do a lot more research in terms of, you know, what type of property you're going to buy, what your exit strategy is going to be, what your investment strategy is going to be, and then you go ahead and purchase the property, right?
Yeah.
You kind of did it the opposite way.
I did it the opposite way.
You bought it first, and then you figured everything else out afterwards.
Right.
So out of that entire, you know, situation that went down, what was the biggest lesson you learned?
Here's the thing is that, you know, obviously everything was a learning lesson I was going through throughout the process. But the main thing that people get stuck on as well is that I do recommend doing sort of what you highlighted, right? Building your power team, networking, figuring out exits. But people get too stuck up on that to the point where it leads to analysis paralysis, right? They go through that process and they don't make their first purchase till a year and a half later. Nothing wrong with that. Obviously, you take your time and make sure you're making a good investment. But that being said, it should not take a year and a half if you're really going through that process. It's not an intense process to go down. Like if you really put your mind to it, you can get all of that done within 2 months or less, right? If you really commit to that process. I did the opposite way. I jumped the gun first and figured everything out. So it's almost like learning on the fly. Yes, there are a lot of mistakes that I made along the way that I'll learn from. But that being said, I necessarily don't regret it. I don't recommend it, but I don't regret how I jumped into the market as well, right? Because I forced myself to get into that industry basically within a month's period of time from when I bought to building the entire power team out and learning everything about real estate, like listening to podcasts like this, reading books, listening to YouTube videos, going to a ton of networking events. I had no other choice because I made my first purchase.
So you had to. And you had no job at this point.
I still had a job then.
You still had a job?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a job, yeah.
So when did you transition from working to being an entrepreneur?
Right, so actually, I bought my first couple of properties while I was working full-time just because I could use my income to continue to qualify. During that time, you know, any time after work or during lunch, I was committed into real estate. I was doing something real estate related and productive. During my commutes over to work and commutes back home, all real estate, podcasts, making notes, absorbing information. As I grew my portfolio while working my full-time job, I realized that portfolio growth is awesome for equity and net worth gains. Not necessarily always the greatest thing as an income source to leave your job. You need some sort of other income to supplement it, right? And that's when I started doing wholesaling. While I was buying these properties, I wasn't closing on every single one of them. And I built my connections to the point where people were feeding me off-market leads. And some of them didn't fit my criteria. So naturally, I started assigning these deals to other individuals. So for those who don't know what wholesaling is, basically you're getting a property under contract, you're getting a signed agreement of purchase and sales, and instead of closing on that assigned agreement to purchase and sales yourself, you're assigning it to another investor and collecting a spread in between, right? So that's essentially what I was doing for active income while working my full-time job. And then, you know, when that raise issue came, I already had this active income source, already had built a portfolio. So it was an easier transition for me to make. But I was still in the very preliminary stages of the wholesaling business, right? And it wasn't until I left my job where I was able to dedicate a lot of time into growing that into, the first year was a 7-figure revenue business.
Okay, so this was probably what, 2020, 2020?
This is 2020.
2020. Yeah. So walk me through, how long did it take you from your first property to the 10th property?
Ooh, that's a good question. So the growth started off slow at the beginning, right? I think for most people, most entrepreneurs, the growth is always slow and then it starts snowballing. So to get my first 3 properties took about, I want to say 12 months or so. So it was still pretty quick, right? But slower than my pace after. I started enrolling joint ventures, meaning that I had individuals who wanted to co-invest with me. They bought the capital, I bought the deal and did the active work, and then would split the profits 50-50. That's really when my portfolio started to scale aggressively. And all of that was just through documenting my journey on social media. Like my friends and family network are not wealthy. Obviously, they just graduated university, so they're in debt. My family is like blue collar laborers, so they're not like well connected. So every joint venture I'd connected with was as a result of going on social media, and also by hosting the Rise Network. So I started like creating this sort of meetup. It was a way for me to gain credibility, but also a way for getting investors together who were in Toronto but couldn't afford Toronto, right? They were buying elsewhere. So it started off with like 5 or 10 people. It grew to 20 people. And it shrunk back down to 5 people. Like, it was sporadic with this meetup, right? But I don't know what the turning point was, but over time, word of mouth, more and more people started to show up. So that was another means for me to eventually get some joint ventures through there. But that group organically blew up to 7,500 members. No advertising, didn't spend a dime. It just was a snowball effect, right? And it was the same thing with my property. After I started getting joint ventures, it became like a snowball effect. So 10 properties probably took, I think it was probably around 18 months or around there at that point.
That's still very quick.
Yeah, during that 8 months, I scaled pretty aggressively.
But
yeah.
And if you tried to do all of that on your own, it probably wouldn't have been possible in 18 months. Am I right in
It would have been too much risk. You could do it, but you would have been leveraging, pulling from every line of credit possible. It wouldn't have been sustainable, I'll say that.
So what are some of the key lessons you've learned when partnering or joint venturing with people?
Yeah. At the beginning, I was taking any sort of joint venture. I was just excited someone wanted to get into business with me. What I've learned from it is expectation setting, right? At the beginning with my first couple of joint ventures, the expectation I set is that, I'm on call at all times to teach you how to invest, not only invest with me, but to do your own portfolio. So it almost became like a coaching arrangement on top of joint venturing. Now, as I continue to scale my portfolio, it's harder to have that coaching arrangement with individuals, right? They're supposed to be a passive investor for a reason. So I think expectation setting at the beginning, thinking about the long term of what you want from an ideal joint venture partner. Do you want someone who only has 80,000 and they're investing all 80,000 with you? Probably not, because they're going to be stressed out because it's every dime that they have. Versus, do you want someone who has 80,000 to invest, but maybe they have 200,000 or 300,000 sitting aside, right? So they're going to be less stressed. They're probably going to be more cooperative throughout that process. So I really started dialing back on my joint venture avatar. Who's my ideal avatar that I want to partner with? That's going to provide me with the less stress in this partnership, but also vice versa as well. They're not going to be stressing out because they invested every dime of their savings, right? Once I figured that out, I started making that my target. If people don't fit that bucket, I'll just let them know, look, unfortunately, this is not going to work out right now, right? And these are the reasons why. But if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them, right? And just sort of leave it at that.
So you're still offering value to these people in terms of your support, but you're just not taking them on as a joint venture.
That's right.
I'm sure people can appreciate that. What were the responses you would get when you turn people down like that?
I think most people did appreciate that, right? Because usually when they're speaking to you, they might be speaking with a couple of other people they're interested in partnering with as well. And these other individuals may be too pushy or may try to put a contract in front of them. I think they respected the fact that I was transparent. And oftentimes I also let them know, it's like, hey, look, you're probably better off with the capital that you have, right, which is still tight. You're probably better off joint venturing with someone who's also going to put in money with you, right? So a friend who wants to look into real estate investing as well. So therefore, you're both pooling your resources, right? So it becomes half instead of all of your money. So giving them advice in that sense, I think a lot of times they're very happy with it because you are actually giving them value and pointing them in the right direction. You're giving them advice. I'm giving them advice of what I would do if I was in their situation, right?
Right. So you've established your real estate investment network at this point. You've also established your wholesaling business.
Right.
And at the same time, you're also doing growing your portfolio at the same time.
Right.
So all of this leads to a 7-figure business that you're running all at once. What are you doing differently now that you're running a 7-figure business compared to when you first started?
Yeah. With just to make a slight correction, the wholesaling business was the one that was generating the majority of the revenue, honestly, and that was also in a time, just to preface, where the market was very hot, so it was like not too difficult to get to that point. That being said, like some of the things that I learned during that process is to hire things out, right? Like you can only grow so much yourself. You only have a limited amount of time in a day. And so my first hire was an admin, a virtual assistant from the Philippines, and they are still with me today. And they've evolved so much. So when they first started working for me, they knew nothing about real estate. Now they do all of my editing for my reels. They do all of my, with wholesaling, you have to create transactions and documentation. They deal with all of them. They deal with all of the paperwork, reaching out to the assignees, reaching out to clients, talking to the lawyer as well, like facilitating transactions to the lawyer. So they're a crucial member to my team. And again, because it's overseas hire, it's relatively affordable. I also, every time we were growing our business, I was trying to figure out where the bottleneck was. And then I'd try to fill in that spot with a hire, right? Train them and then fill it out with another hire, and just sort of continuing from there. But Ashley, I don't want to make things sound so easy, because obviously when the market turned drastically in 2022, that was a tough situation, right? Then we had to sort of pivot and figure out ways to cut expenses and increase revenues, which is very tough in a market where people are not actively buying, right?
So all the investors have basically gone.
Basically, they've evaporated, right?
Disappeared overnight, right?
Because, the Bank of Canada made it abundantly clear they were going to hike rates aggressively. And so people were not really out in the market buying, and sellers were still stuck on February 2022 prices. So with this like odd state that we're in. And we actually we were burning 35 to 40,000 a month for like 4 months in a row between advertising, paying salaries and all of that, because we wanted to try to make things work, right? But the issue is that also when you start hiring a bunch of things out, your overhead also increases significantly. Yeah. And if things turn, you need to have a game plan for that. Unfortunately, we did have to make some tough decisions, right, with employment. We try to keep people there as long as possible, but we were burning a lot of money. So I don't want to make things seem all rosy, right? There are times where it was a huge challenge. Right now, we're operating on a lean business, right? So we still have 2 people working for us at the moment, and we're trying to maximize our margins, right?
Yeah. I think this is the path a lot of businesses take, where they see some success, they start growing their team, and then something changes, an external event happens, and they're forced to recalibrate and completely reorganize their entire structure of their business, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you guys had to do. So let's walk back 2 things I want to discuss. Yeah. First one, when making the hire, what are some key things that you're looking for to make the right hire?
Yeah, I guess for me, it was a little bit easier. And part of the reason being is because I already had a real estate brand. So I had a lot of followers who were interested in real estate. The first thing I wanted to see was passion and involvement into the real estate space. And also, I didn't want people to dabble part-time. I wanted full-time, right? I wanted someone who would be fully committed in the process and has shown already, to the point of interviewing them, that they've read the books that needed to be read. They are engaged with the podcast. It shows me that they're motivated and they're hungry to be involved in that space. So that was the biggest thing over everything else. I guess work experience did matter to me, but it wasn't the be-all, end-all, especially in entrepreneurship when you're in a growing business. Their particular roles are going to be undefined, right? I might need them for example, disposition, which is like speaking to speaking to investors, but I may probably have to have them switch to multiple other roles as well. If they showed me that they have the personality and the characteristic and the hunger to do well in the role, I'm honestly willing to oversee a lot of things, right? Probably not the answer that the big corporations would give, but in a growing business, that's what I look for the most.
Now, when you were faced with risk and uncertainty when the market changed, how did you approach that decision making? Right. Was it something that happened overnight, or did you have to strategically think about how you're going to let go of certain people and make your business more lean?
Yeah, so we were very transparent, right? Especially as a small business, a lot of your employees, they rely on you to one, to obviously perform the best, but 2, as a source of income for themselves, to support themselves, right? So from the jump, when the market changed, we have weekly meetings, right? And we'd let them know what we're seeing, which show them the stats, like how many leads that we're converting, how many leads that we're getting. And everything that we knew, they were aware of too. We would be transparent with them with our monthly burn, but we would also assure them, like, look, we're going to try to do whatever we can to get these numbers up. Because, the more transparent you are with them, the more that they realize like what state the business is in, possibly the harder they start working as well, right? So we're all in this together. It's our business, like we're a family together. And over time, would let them know. It's like if it was continuing to get worse, we're like, look, we might have to make some tough decisions here. So, it might be worthwhile for you guys starting to look at other opportunities, but we're going to continue to do what we can in the meantime, right? And as I said, this was on a weekly basis. It was like 3 months before we had to make those tough decisions. And we knew we should have made those decisions probably sooner. But that being said, like there's also a humane aspect to it as well.
Yes.
Like these people help grow the business, and we wanted to do whatever we can to make sure that they're well taken care of.
Absolutely. And I probably think you have good relationships with all of those
All
people
of them,
to this
yeah.
day.
Yeah.
So, the business that you're in with wholesaling, it really thrives on the type of market that you're in. It kind of determines, if you're going to do super well one year or, you're going to do poorly another. Are you still doing that business today?
Yeah, we are still doing wholesaling.
Okay.
And like regardless if the industry is doing well or if it's not, there are still ways to win. There's always going to be winners.
And that's what I want to get into, right? So what type of strategies are you implementing now to make it a more consistent business,
right,
rather than having it being so focused on how externally the market is doing?
Right. Yeah. So we had to be creative in our outreach. I don't want to give all of the secrets of how we're getting leads, right? But
of course, let's keep it very high level on strategy, right?
Okay, so prior we're focusing on paid leads very heavy. Just throw a ton of money and you're gonna get leads back and it's gonna convert to deals. Now you can't necessarily, some people are still throwing a lot of money and it does work out, right? It's a numbers game ultimately, but it's harder to justify throwing a lot of money, and if the deals don't end up panning out, like that is sunk cost, right? And so we pivoted towards low cost marketing strategies. That means very cheap marketing or no cost at all, and being much more active in the market and networking. Think about things like door knocking as a realtor, right?
Yeah.
So we shifted towards that, and we're able to obviously increase our margins pretty drastically. When we generate revenue, then we're remarketing out and doing some paid marketing.
For sure.
Yeah, pivoting that focus.
I know the marketing can get very expensive because I used to wholesale back in the days, and you'd basically pick a neighborhood on Canada Post and just send out flyers there. And 11 cents per flyer with Canada Post plus your printing costs, you're paying 25 cents per flyer.
Exactly.
It gets very, very expensive very quickly. And you have to flyer, like, what was the conversion rate at that time? It's been so long, but like maybe 1% of people.
We don't even do flyering anymore, to be honest.
But that's what I can completely understand how expensive that was. Besides switching to low-cost marketing, did you guys focus on maybe strategies to make your conversion better, or sales strategies or anything like that?
Yeah. So, the difficult part now, so acquisitions has always been a little bit of a challenge, but we always follow up with acquisitions. Hasn't changed. It's like contact them. If they're not interested, follow up with them consistently. Text message, phone call, until they eventually tell you that we've either sold the property or we're not going to sell it at all. We're not interested. Leave me alone, right?
Yes.
So we're very consistent with our follow-up. That hasn't necessarily changed. What changed more is on the disposition side, dealing with investors. So some strategies that we've been implementing is not only are we obviously just marketing it out to our email list, but we're checking the open rate. We're checking who has opened the email multiple times. We're checking who's clicked on the links. So like MailChimp, for example, you can dig down the data and actually see who's opening these things. If they've opened it multiple times, we'll contact them, even if they never reach out. It's like, hey, we saw that you viewed this email 3 or 4 times. Wanted to hear what your thoughts are on it, right? And just get their feedback. And sometimes, like, it's been situations where it's like, yeah, we think that you marketed it too high, like would be offering 20, 30K less. And if we don't have any other interest at that time, we'll be like, okay, totally understand, but could you explain why, to tell us the reasons why? It's like, if we are able to get it at the price that you're looking for, are you prepared to put an offer? And they're like, yeah, we are. And so we take that, all of the list of why they believe the property should be a certain price. We communicate it to the seller. We negotiate with the seller, and then we get a deal done that way. So it's a lot more, what do investors want? What do sellers want? Heavy negotiation between both sides, reduce the contract price, and then get the deal done. Whereas before, send the deal out, 10 offers, you remember the good time.
Yeah,
10
yeah,
offers, don't have to do much follow-up on the dispo side, and that's it, right? Now it's very heavy follow-up on the dispo side and getting feedback from every single buyer.
And I think it's about building relationships, right?
Yeah.
And how often do you find people that you've invested with or you've sold or assigned properties to, they've reinvested with you in the future? Do you find a lot of repeat business?
Yes and no. It depends on what area that you're marketing out to, obviously, right? But if I was to market a Toronto deal today, I already know everyone who's going to contact me, right? Because we either did business before, or they might have put in an offer, but it never went through because we got a higher offer. But yeah, I mean, it's to your point. It's all about a relationship business. You'd be surprised the calls that I get where sometimes they're like, oh, we've done business with X and X, and there were things that were not disclosed to us that we weren't aware of, right? So I lead with transparency. I let them know, it's like, look, every piece of information we have in the email is to the best of our knowledge, it's what the seller told us. It could all be wrong, right? This is what we saw. This is what was communicated to us. This is what we believe to be true. But you should go do your own due diligence. This is not on market. We're not regulated by the same bodies as a realtor, right? At the end of the day, this decision lives and dies by you. We're not trying to misrepresent anything. We don't go out of our way to misrepresent anything, but you should do your own due diligence, right? And we let every buyer know that, right? If they're putting something sight unseen, we let them, are you sure you want to do that? Like, these are things that we saw, but we could be wrong about it, right? So not every company does that. They just want to get a deal done. And as a result of that, being transparent, we do get a lot of repeat clients or people that just tell us that they appreciate how honest we are with them.
Right. So leading with honesty and transparency.
Yeah.
And that builds your perception with the public and everything else.
Exactly.
Right? And it just ends up feeding back more business for you down the line. I want to circle back to another question. You've successfully pivoted from working for a company to, being an entrepreneur, running a very successful business. What is one piece of advice you would give to someone else that's looking to do the same today?
That's a very, very good question. Why don't we talk from the real estate angle of real estate investing? Because I'm sure a lot of your clients also watch this as well. One big thing to note when you get into investing into real estate is that everyone wants to grow a massive portfolio, and I totally understand why, right? It's fun and you want to build your wealth, but you should do it at your own pace. A lot of the people who have gotten in trouble nowadays is because they overextended themselves, they over-leveraged themselves. They saw what was going on in social media and thought that was the reality of real life, right? They don't see what happens in the behind the scenes of all of these individuals. There are a lot of people struggling right now because, again, they grew too quickly, too fast. When you get into an investment vehicle such as real estate, it is a levered investment. And so while you can make a lot of gains, if things go south, you can lose a lot of money as well. So I would say, before getting into that investment, make sure that you're in the right headspace. Make sure you do have the liquid funds to support that investment. Make sure that if you feel like the funds would be tight, partner up with someone. Find a way to alleviate it such that you don't have to sell the property right away. And obviously investing for cash flow positive properties. That's never going to really change. If you're able to buy a property today that's cash flow positive, with rates going down, likely it's going to continue to be cash flow positive, right? So long story short, don't overextend yourself. We all have goals and ambitions. It's not a race to get there. It's really a marathon, right? And if you try to get yourself to that end goal too quickly, you could get yourself in a lot of trouble as well.
Always live in your own world. Don't live in other people's world.
Exactly.
Right? That's the best piece of advice I can give to a lot of people, especially with social media these days. There's a lot of gurus. There's a lot of people that are doing amazing on social media, but we only see the positives. We never see, what's actually going on behind the scenes.
I do because I've lent money to people, never got it back. They're still posting on social media. So trust me, it's a lot of smokes in here.
There's people buying on promissory notes. All these things that
There's a lot going on.
A lot going on, but live in your own world. And I think it's key, get the right people around you to give you the right advice, right? How key was that, having the right mentors around you?
Yeah, having the right mentors was extremely important. I've done paid mentorship where I paid individuals to coach me. That was fantastic. I've also done free mentorships where I would sacrifice my time to go work and learn from someone. So Mike Rosehart, who's been a massive mentor of mine, he lives in London, Ontario. He was able to retire corporate, I think at 25. I would go every weekend from Toronto to London while I was still working at RBC. And I would stay overnight at his house, do a bunch of renovations, but learn from the renovation process. He's like, this is what I look out for. These are things that I don't want to deal with in a property. So yeah, mentors are extremely important. You learn, it's almost like a fast track. You learn from their mistakes, right? And when things get tough, you have a soundboard to feed off of.
Yeah, it's just about leaning on people that have done it better than you
Exactly.
in the past, right? And just leaning on their experiences, their network, their skill set, everything that they bring to the table. And if you have the right people around you, it's only going to push you forward. Let's also talk about, we have a little bit more time. I wanted to talk about, you pivoted from corporate to real estate, and then real estate investing to, I guess, wholesaling, which is, a segment of investing. Now you've pivoted again to another industry and you're doing mortgages. Walk me through why you did that. Right. And how that transition happened.
Yeah, so they all have synergies with each other. The investing led to wholesaling because I couldn't close on every deal, and so I had to assign some, and then that business sort of took shape. And with wholesaling, what I found is when, times were tough, a lot of people were relying on private money to get deals done. I would assign deals. I would trust that people would find a way to close them. And sometimes they weren't able to pull the private money together. And so I almost had to step in and then link people together with other people who have money that they wanted to lend out. I wasn't a mortgage broker at that time. Not even sure if I was able to do that, not being a mortgage broker. I just made the introduction and then they sort of figured things out themselves. But then I was, throughout that process, I was thinking, I could create another business off of this because I'm doing wholesaling, because I have this client base that needs to close on these properties. Right? There's a lot of mortgage agents who don't know what wholesaling is, don't know what assignment fees are, don't know how to best finance it. So that's how this other segment sort of branched off, right? And then that was my first couple of clients, is just through like the wholesaling segment and private deals. So I've done a couple of private deals even last week. But since then, it's branched out to much more than that, right? So dealing with first-time home buyers, dealing with investors who are early on in their journey, and it's sort of grown from there. But every transition was because there was a problem with the other business, and then this it's almost like I could solve this problem, so let me put something together.
Exactly. Now, in this new industry that you're working in, obviously the investors are one segment of the demographic that you work with, but now you've had to work with first-time home buyers, end users, maybe retirees,
right.
Basically everyone else out in the world. What are some strategies that you're using or that you're seeing that's working for you when dealing with this new segment of the population? Yeah,
definitely. Like I would say the first time, when you chat with investors, it's a much different conversation than when you chat with a first-time home buyer, right? Investors are much less rate sensitive. They just want to get the deal done to the finish line. It's going to cash flow. They want to choose the best product. For first-time home buyers, you do have to shift the focus and understand their perspective, right? Because a lot of times they are stretching themselves, and so payment ultimately matters, right? So the conversation changed a lot. I had to, it shifted to like, what are ways that you can save money? And there are tons of different ways, right? Like some of them is first home savings account, RSPs. If you contribute there, you can get a tax refund by the government. So educating them on that and having a lot of conversations around that. Educating them on the different first-time home buyer benefits, right? So being able to save on land transfer tax being a first-time home buyer. So it's a lot more education and it's a lot more of a longer life cycle, right? But I basically had to adapt my approach towards that. Budgeting as well. So a lot of first-time home buyers don't do budgeting when they buy a property. They just want to jump into the market. They want to, just because they can qualify for a certain amount, they feel like, let's stretch ourselves and buy at that exact amount.
And they end up being house poor.
Yeah, exactly. So then I build out a spreadsheet for them now, right? And that's what I do with all of the first-time home buyer clients. We do a budgeting exercise and show them, like, look, this is, if you allocate this much to meals and entertainment, transportation, et cetera, this is how much you have saved at the end of the day. So it's a total different focus, right? Yeah. But the only reason, or not the only reason, like one of the biggest ways I was able to learn through that is by leaning on mentors, as I was, like we were chatting about earlier, right? Leaning on people who focused on that segment and asking them what provided the most value to their clients when they were doing this, right? And so I started doing the same thing.
It's also like, with investors and your past clientele, it was more of an analytical approach, right?
Yeah.
Like, numbers are king, right? Whereas with everybody else, end users, there's an emotional aspect to it that you kind of have to lean into. Right. So I'm sure that was a bit of a learning curve, but like you said, leaning on the right mentors and getting the right advice and people around you kind of helped you segue into that a lot better. I want to end off the session with asking you, I like to ask all of my guests this question. If you were to do it all over again, how would you do things differently?
Ooh, very, very good question. If I was to do it all over again, how would I do things differently? Okay, so I kind of alluded to this earlier, but I would use social media as a tool for my business to grow, but I would not constantly compare myself to other people. And I think that's a habit that a lot of people have, especially entrepreneurs, right? You're always moving on to the next big and best things and setting your goals higher and higher. I found whenever I was doing that, it was great that it promoted growth, wasn't the greatest for mental health all of the time, right? So if I was to do things differently, it would be to use social media obviously as a tool to continue to scale and grow my business, but not to constantly compare myself to other people. And I don't think, we didn't really touch on this in the podcast, but one of the issues that I ran across by doing this is, everyone was scaling their portfolio, so I figured I'll end up scaling my portfolio aggressively as well. When the pandemic hit, I had a couple of closings. Obviously, credit was tight when the pandemic first hit and property prices were dropping, people were not buying. And so I was stuck in a position where I was over leveraged. I had to pull from different lines of credit to get deals done. And I thought that it was gonna be like end road for it. It's like, all right, everything that I worked up to this point is done, right? Fortunately, the market recovered. So, there wasn't much I could do, but the market recovered and I was able to get myself in a pretty stable position. I've made those decisions because of FOMO, because of looking at social media, seeing what other people were doing, and then trying to mimic after them, right? But yeah, that would be the main thing. And right now, currently, where I am with my business is I use social media, again, solely as a tool for my business. I don't go on too often. I don't look at people's stories. To each their own. I don't do that, right? I just use it to make posts. Even my VA has my password to comment on people's posts as well. So I don't even have to do that anymore too. And just, yeah, I guess that's the best feedback I have.
As a tool, using social media as a tool for your business rather than something that drives your business. And I guess that's the wrong way to say it, but using it as a tool for your business, but not something that drives your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, that's best way to put it.
That's the best way to put it. And that's so true. Everybody sees what everybody else is doing on social media, and just because someone else is doing it and they're successful, it doesn't mean it's the right strategy for you. Right? Picking up rental properties, it's not the best strategy for everybody to grow their wealth. There's a lot involved, and a lot of things can go wrong that people aren't actually aware of, right? Yeah. And I think that's the problem that we see a lot is, everybody's so driven by FOMO. And if you just take a step back and realize that you're only seeing the positives in people's lives, not everything else that goes behind the scenes. And, it's not as rosy as it seems, right? So great advice. Before we let you go, I just want to ask, where can everybody find you? If they want to reach out to you, where can they reach out to you? And how can they work with you? Right. So I'm on all major social media platforms, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. The best way to reach out to me is just on Instagram at Austin Yeh 6. And there's a link tree there. You can access all of my other socials. The best way to reach out, that is the best way to reach out. How they can work with me so I am a mortgage broker now, so if anyone has any questions on financing, needs any assistance, wants me to look over anything, they can book a free call with me. If they go on Instagram, there's a link there that they can do so. Or if they're looking for off-market deals to either fix and flip or buy their first investment property, we do own Ontario property deals, so make sure to register there on our buyers list as well. Awesome. Thank you so much, Austin, for coming on the show. Guys, this was so much value. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please give Austin a follow on Instagram, and please reach out to him for any of your investing or financing needs. He's a fantastic guy. Thank you so much for coming on. Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you.